All right. Good morning, everybody. Thursday morning. We are just in the middle of our chapters of the prophecies to the nations towards the very, very end of Yirmiyahu. This is going to be chapter 49. We've already covered Egypt and Moab and a short passage on Gaza, on Aza. And this chapter is the kind of catch-all in which we will have 5 or 6 different nations mentioned, some more prominent, some less so. And then chapters 50 and 51 will conclude the prophecies to the nations with a focus on Bavel. So Egypt and Bavel are our bookends, and we have other variety of neighboring nations in the middle. And then we'll return to a brief kind of historical wrap up and reprise of these the period of the destruction of the temple. That'll take us to the end of Jeremiah. So we're making our way. I'm pretty sure we will not be meeting next Thursday. It's SAR school break, so I'll be hanging out with my kids. But stay tuned for an email or check the bulletin for confirmation of that. But expect that we won't be meeting next Thursday, but we'll pick up again the following Thursday.
What will our topic be?
We're just carrying on through Jeremiah.
Jeremiah. Okay.
Yep. So next, presumably in 2 weeks, we'll be on Jeremiah chapter 50 since today's chapter 49.
Oh, okay.
Let me share my screen as we start our way in. So we're good. The things to notice as we read through this chapter, keeping in mind, especially last week, just keeping track of which nation we're talking about in this multi-nation chapter. We want to keep our eye out for are the sins of the nation mentioned? What are the wrongdoings that seem to be the basis for their punishment, for their comeuppance? Is there any reference to Israelites? We saw in the previous chapter with Moab, there was a couple of brief references to Israelites. We look out for place names to give us a little bit more of the flavor of the nation that we're talking about, and any other hints to kind of, why they were punished, what was their punishment. And then the other thing we've seen sometimes appearing and sometimes not is whether there's a line of consolation and restoration after the prophecy of destruction. So for the various nations that we're going to see referenced here at the end of their little sections, is there a reference to, I will then restore their, dispersal, and they will, have rest as in days past? Or is it simply a prophecy of destruction? Those are the things we want to make notice of as we go. And then once we've read through, we'll do what we've also done in the last few weeks, which is notice textual parallels, one particular textual parallel to a different prophecy in Nevi'im, and then also one rabbinic text, a Mishnah, which actually quotes from our chapter. Pretty unusual because the Mishnah does not quote, the sages in Midrashic literature quote Psukim a lot, but one of the things that distinguishes the Mishnah as a rabbinic text, while it's heavily based on biblical texts, it very rarely quotes them. And I would say if it does, Nevi'im Acharonim are among the less likely to be quoted, but we'll see a quote from Jeremiah chapter 49 in the Mishnah that we're going to look at in just a little bit. So
where geographically today would the Ammonites have been?
Yeah. So once we read through, we'll try to get a sense of the geographic positioning and see if that actually sheds any light on the placement of these nations in this chapter. So correct, good question. Hold on to it until we get through the 5 or 6 nations that we're looking at. And Elaine, will you start us off concerning the Ammonites?
Concerning the Ammonites, thus said the Lord, has Israel no sons? Has he no heir? Then why has Milcom dispossessed God? And why have his people settled in God's towns? Assuredly, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will sound the alarm of war against Rabbah of the Ammonites. It shall become a desolate mound, and its villages shall be set on fire, and Israel shall dispossess those who dispossessed him, said the Lord. Howl, O Heshbon, for Ai is ravaged. Cry out, O daughters of Rabbah. Gird on sackcloth, lament, and run to and fro to the sheepfolds. For Milcom shall go into exile together with his priests and attendants. Why do you glory in strength? Your strength is drained, O rebellious daughter. You who relied on your treasures, who said, who dares attack me? I am bringing terror upon you, declares the Lord of hosts, from all those around you. Every one of you shall be driven in every direction, and none shall gather in the fugitives. But afterward, I will restore the fortunes of the Ammonites, declared the Lord.
Okay, great. Estelle, will you read for us concerning Edom?
Concerning Edom, thus said the Lord of hosts, is there no more wisdom in Teman? Has counsel vanished from the prudent? Has their wisdom gone stale? Flee, turn away, sit down low, O inhabitants of Dedan, for I am bringing Esau's doom upon him, the time when I deal with him. If vintagers were to come upon you, would they leave no gleanings? Even thieves in the night would destroy only for their needs. But it is I who have bared Esau, have exposed his place of concealment. He cannot hide. His offspring is ravished, his kin and his neighborhood. He is no more. Leave your orphans with me. I will rear them. Let your widows rely on me. For thus said the Lord, if they who rightly should not drink of the cup must drink it, are you the one to go unpunished? You shall not go unpunished. You will have to drink. For by myself I swear, declares the Lord, Bozrah shall become a desolation, a mockery, a ruin, and a curse, and all its towns shall be ruins for all time. I have received tidings from the Lord, and an envoy is sent out among the nations. Assemble and move against her, and rise up for war. For I will make you I will make you least among nations, most despised among men. Your horrible nature, your arrogant heart has seduced you. You who have dwelt in depths of the rock, who occupy the height of the hill, should you nest as high as the eagle, from there I will pull you down, declares the Lord. Good Lord. And Edom shall be a cause of appallment. Whoever passes by will be appalled and will hiss at all its wounds. It shall be like the overthrow of Sodom and of Sodom and Gomorrah and their neighbors, said the Lord. No man shall live there, no human shall sojourn there. It shall be as when a lion comes up out of the jungle of the Jordan against a secure pasture. In a moment, I can harry him out of it and appoint over it anyone I choose. Then who is like me? Who can summon me? Who is the shepherd that can send up against me? Hear then the plan which the Lord has devised against Edom, and what he has proposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the shepherd boys shall drag them away. Surely the pasture shall be aghast because of them. At the sound of their downfall, the earth shall shake. The sound of screaming shall be heard at the Sea of Reeds. See, like an eagle he flies up. He soars and spreads his wings against Bozrah. And the heart of Edom's warriors in that day shall be like the heart of a woman in travail.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good Lord.
Very, very, that's certainly the heart of the chapter is the Edom Esav section. Ellen, will you read for us concerning Damascus, verse 23?
Concerning Damascus, Hamath and Arpad are shamed, for they have heard bad news. They shake with anxiety, like the sea which cannot rest. Damascus has grown weak. She has turned around to flee. Trembling has seized her. Pain and anguish have taken hold of her, like a woman in childbirth. How has the glorious city not been deserted, the citadel of my joy? Assuredly, her young men shall lie fallen in her squares, and all her warriors shall be stilled in that day, declares the Lord of hosts. I will set fire to the walls of Damascus, and it shall consume the fortress of Ben-Hadad.
Okay, keep going to the next section concerning Kedar and Chatzor.
Concerning Kedar and the kingdoms of Hazor, which King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered. Thus said the Lord, arise, march against Kedar, and ravage the Kedemites. They will take away their tents and their flocks, their tent cloths and all their gear. They shall carry off their camels, and they shall proclaim against them terror all around. Flee, wander far, set down low, O inhabitants of Hazor, says the Lord. For King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon has devised a plan against you and formed a purpose against you. Rise up, attack a tranquil nation that dwells secure, says the Lord. That has no barred gates, that dwells alone. Their camels shall become booty, and their abundant flocks a spoil. And I will scatter to every quarter those who have their hair clipped. And from every direction I will bring disaster upon them, says the Lord. Hazor shall become a lair of jackals, a desolation for all time. No man shall live there. No humans shall sojourn there.
Okay, very good. Graham, will you do the last portion for us about Elam, verse 34? We don't hear you yet. If you can unmute.
Okay, sorry.
Great, great.
Oh, good. 34. The word of the Lord that came to the prophet Jeremiah concerning Elam at the beginning of the reign of King Zedekiah of Judah. Thus said the Lord of hosts, I am going to break the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their strength. I shall bring four winds against Elam from the four quarters of heaven, and scatter them to all those winds. There shall not be a nation to which the fugitives from Elam do not come. And I will break Elam before their enemies, before those who seek their lives, and I will bring disaster upon them. My flaming wrath, declares the Lord. And I will dispatch the sword after them until I have consumed them. And I will set my throne in Elam and wipe out from their king and official, says the Lord. But in the days to come, I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares the Lord.
Okay, very good. So we'll dive back into the specifics in a few moments, but we saw really 5 or 6 kingdoms and a lot of common themes, the themes that we also have seen throughout the prophecies to Judah and Jerusalem, which are, days are coming in which there will be great destruction of the common people, destruction of the leadership, dispersal of the people. In some instances, the description of the land as not being inhabitable anymore. In others, we didn't see that. And then in some cases, the concluding line of restoration, and in other cases, that line was not there. So these are our various brief prophecies of the nations. I think it was Ellen who asked about the geographic location of them. So I'll just briefly mention Ammon, the first of the nations that we encounter in this chapter, is north of Moab. So in the previous chapter, chapter 48, we were focused on Moab. Moab generally lies to the east of the Jordan River. It's the sort of immediate eastern neighbor of the Israelites. Ammon lies to the north of Moab. Then Edom lies to the south of Moab. So we have our northeastern neighbor and our southeastern neighbor. Then we have Damascus, of course, which lies to the north, due north of Israel. Then we have Kedar and Chatzur, which are kind of good bit further east. And then finally, we have Elam, which is much more in the Mesopotamia, Persia type of region. Kind of the Purim story. Shushan is considered to be the capital of Elam, so Elam is equivalent to Persia, Media, etc. So we kind of go northeast, southeast, north, further, and then further east. So we kind of see these as kind of concentric rings, essentially, of neighbors, and neighbors with whom we don't have, as central a relationship, maybe because they're not as geographically proximate. We didn't have to necessarily travel through all of those regions on our way from Egypt into the land of Canaan. So in that kind of critical moment, we have less encounter. Edom we do, but most of the others not. And obviously there's history between the early Israelites and some of these nations going back to the book of Bereshit, but by and large they're kind of secondary. So if we're starting with Egypt and then going to the brief passage about the Plishtim in Aza, and then Moab, we're sort of talking both historically and contemporarily to Jeremiah, our more immediate neighbors, and then we move to the further regions, and then we will end in the next two chapters with Babylonia, which is kind of actually the most immediate in a certain sense, even though not the most geographically proximate, but the most immediate interactor, not international relations partner and oppressor, and so we sort of conclude there. So this is this is in a sense. In the Nevi'im, we have our main Nevi'im, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, and Yechezkel, and then we have Treyasar, the 12 minor prophets. They weren't necessarily minor because they were less important, but their prophecies that we have recorded and preserved are briefer. This is kind of the equivalent of the Treyasar of the nations. These are the more minor, passages. Again, not necessarily because they were less important, but the prophecies about them were shorter, so they're all preserved together in this one chapter. And again, they're kind of figure as secondary. So just a little kind of geographic and relational background. Let's go back and just look at a couple of specific points in the chapter and then open up to questions and comments. So going back up to the beginning. Okay, so we may recall last week we saw the place name Madmen, which in the English, it looked like it said madmen. So to here we have an interesting kind of sort of play, which is that one of the seems to be gods of the Ammonites was named Milcom or Malcom, which creates a little bit of a confusion because Malcom in biblical Hebrew means their king. And so there's a kind of a confusion here, especially in this in the verse here in verse 3, where it says Ki Malkam Bagola Yelech. We would, if we weren't reading closely, we would assume we were translating that as their God goes into exile. But then when it says Kohanav Sarav Yachtav, together with his priests and attendants, it doesn't make as much sense that priests and attendants belong to a king, maybe attendants, maybe sarim, but kohanim, you wouldn't typically describe them as the priests of the king. They're the priests of the god. And therefore, we can tell that Malkam doesn't mean their god, Melech Shelahem, but it's actually the name of an Ammonite deity. And that, of course, makes it clearer here in the first verse of the chapter, where it says concerning Ammon, so it says, God, has Israel no sons, has Israel no heir? Then why has Malkam dispossessed God and why have his people settled in God's towns? Another kind of alliterative confusion with English. But Malkam here is the name of the Ammonite deity. And again, here in this very first verse, we already see a reference to Israel. Some of the prophecies in this chapter make no mention of the Israelites at all, but this one does, and with an interesting rhetorical question, right? Why have the Ammonites attempted to, lay claim to some land, which the Israelites live in? Do the Israelites not have their own children to settle that land? Now, again, we mentioned that the Ammonites are on the east side of the Jordan. That makes sense with the people that they are potentially dispossessing, which is God. You'll remember from the book of Numbers that when the Israelites are preparing to cross into the land of Canaan and conquer it and settle it, two and ultimately 2.5 tribes approach Moses and they say, we like the land here on the east side of the Jordan. It has good grazing and pasture, and we'd like to settle here. And Moshe famously says, could it be that your brothers will go fight the battle of the conquest of the land of Canaan and you will stay here? No, you have to come along and fight. And after the land is conquered, if you want to go back and settle on the east side of the Jordan, you can. And those tribes were Reuven, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. So Gad is a tribe which ultimately settles on the east side of the Jordan. They settle in an area which is, adjacent to the Ammonite territory. And so it makes sense that here we're starting with this little reference to a moment in which the Ammonites are attempting to dispossess the Gadites who are living in their general area on the east side of the Jordan to the north. And there's a complaint here. What are the Ammonites doing? So this is clearly a prophecy against the nations in which God is talking about retribution against one of the other nations because they've attempted to do harm to the Israelites. Not all of them are like that. Some of them are just, any nation which sees itself as too powerful will ultimately get its comeuppance. But here, it's very much an Israel-focused prophecy to the other nations. And the days are coming when God will sound the alarm of war, the Teruat Milchama, and lay desolate the Ammonites. And then, kind of circling back, we had the term of Yarash, Yoresh in Madua Yarash in the first verse, and now we have the retribution with Yarash et Yorshav. Now Israel will dispossess those who dispossessed him. So the Ammonites attempted to drive Israel, the tribe of God, out from the area that they were. God will destroy that, and Israel will reclaim that territory which attempted to be taken from them. We have a language that we've seen in the previous few chapters also about rituals of mourning. In previous 2 chapters, we saw, you will gash yourself, you will pull out your hair as rituals of mourning for the other nations in lamenting their own downfall and demise. Here we have it in verse 3 with other practices of mourning. Chagorna sakim tefodna, gird yourself with sackcloth and lament because of the exile which is going to befall the Ammonites. And then again, some of the other themes we've seen in the prophecies about the nations, which is that their downfall, if it's ascribed to anything, it's typically ascribed to their arrogance or sense of strength. And here we have it. Why do you glory in strength? Your strength is drained. Now, if you look on the Hebrew side, the word for strength is strange here. It's amakim or emek, which we actually typically means valley or depth. But it's that meaning would be strange here. So if you look at the JPS footnote, they say meaning of Hebrew uncertain. And the basis on which they translate it as strength comes from the Akkadian emuku. So there is a Semitic language root in which amak or emek seems to mean strength, but it's certainly an uncommon usage in biblical Hebrew. So we don't know for sure, but it's a compelling translation. Why glory in something, that something is going to go away? It makes sense to say that that's strength. And again, we have language here for the other nations that is often used for Israel. Rebellious daughter, the one who trusts in wealth as opposed to trusting in God, who thinks that nothing can stop them, who says, who dares attack me? So God says, I'm going to bring upon you pachad. We've seen that term in the last chapter as well. And the dispersal with no one to gather you in. And then verse 6, V'acharechein ashiv et shavut b'nei Amon ne'um Adonai. But, and as we'll see in the subsequent few nations don't get this promise, but the Ammonites do, that their fortunes will be restored. Okay, I see Carl's hand, so maybe just pause here for a moment, take any comments on the beginning of the chapter, and then we'll continue. Carl, please.
Again, the timing here just confuses me no end. If I remember correctly, even when Yirmiyahu was young, it's many decades or scores of years after the northern tribes have been destroyed. And here he's blaming Ammon for taking over God, which was exiled, decades before.
Yes.
And just in general, I don't fully understand this whole thing about the prophecies of the nations, but what's going on here?
Yeah, great question. And I have continued to not have satisfactory answers either. But so yes, we can only speculate, is this first of all, is this in some way a retrospective prophecy, if you can say such a thing? In other words, is this just as we've seen already, some passages about past destructions of nations have been paraphrased or quoted by Jeremiah. So one possibility is there wasn't a lot to say about Ammon, but he wanted to include them because they were in the region. So he kind of reflects something that's already happened. That's one possibility. Another possibility is he's drawing on, a past feud, or a past conflict between Ammon and God, and just sort of like using it as a placeholder to kind of describe a future punishment that will come. And it's not actually about the tribe of God anymore. But it's a good question. And we do have a lot of inconsistency and uncertainty about these sections. So I'm glad you brought it up, because indeed it feels awkwardly placed here. And I can only speculate a little bit. Lance and then Estelle. Go ahead, Lance.
Imagine that I am the contemporary Jeremiah. I hear God saying 3 words: hell to pay. The 7th seal is an event that introduces the 7 trumpets and the final judgments before the Messiah returns.
Okay. Thank you to the contemporary Jeremiah for imagining what a prophecy might look like today. Great. Estelle, go ahead.
It's a question. I'm sort of trying to get this whole thing together, but exactly what time in history are we talking about at this moment?
Yes, so it's a good question, as Carl asked the question. I can't say for sure. We can say when Jeremiah prophesied, right? He prophesied in the end of the 7th and into the beginning of the 6th century before the Common Era. From around 620 to around 580 was the period of his prophecy. But when he's speaking about Ammon and saying, days are coming when Ammon will be destroyed, and just like they dispossessed the Gadites, they will be dispossessed. There's no way to know what those days are that he's envisioning. Just no way to know. So, again, so in this section, I guess what I would say is, in terms of the consciousness that we're carrying as readers, and this is not in any way to diminish any of the questions, just to say, I think we're aiming to focus less on attempting to get an answer to what specific moment is this prophecy about, and just what distinguishing features, if any, can we pick up about these individual nations and the past history with them, the qualities of them, that are featuring in this prophecy to this nation. But this, with Jeremiah, there was more of an effort in the prophecies to Judah and Jerusalem, and we had more specific time moments and frames and context. Here we just don't have enough to really be able to effectively answer the question. So it's just to say, don't get bogged down by that question. It's not clear to me that that's what should preoccupy us as readers, more just the flavor of the attitude towards each individual nation. So, but
we have to know.
I'm not sure that's why the prophecy is here. I don't think it's necessarily here to point to a specific moment, but it's frustrating to not have a good sense of what that is. Graham?
Well, I think that, well, isn't that the point of the prophecy, that it's timeless?
Sometimes, yes.
Because to me, this sounds like Putin's war. The current war, the Ammonites are like Putin's oligarchy in Russia, the Edomites, ambition, hubris, territorial ambition, um, leading to overextension, loss of resources. For this morning, I heard after it's been 3 years of war, right? Three, and the Russian army has been decimated. There's very few tanks, transport vehicles left, so on, blah blah blah. But so they're reduced to using donkeys. That was the symbol that they were bringing up in this piece, and they showed pictures of the donkeys. They weren't just, making a metaphor. They showed pictures of the donkeys dragging these munitions around to the front, and yet Putin's pride. Get back to the lesson. It keeps the war going. So so God's retribution is coming on him, kind of like in slow motion, and then it makes me think that it's really God is not the one that destroys. That it's the adherence to that a man or a woman or a nation destroys itself by relying on this self pride rather
That's
than
a
God.
good point.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. Thank
And
you.
that goes across, if it happened in 565 BC or BCE or whenever, like what's the Jews?
Yeah.
No, I like that. Nations destroy itself. I absolutely, Graham. That's a wonderful statement. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Good.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. Great. Good when we can answer each other's questions convincingly. So, okay. Lance, hang on a moment. Let's jump back in and see a little bit more text before we come back to comments. Okay, so we covered Ammon. Now we go to Edom, which is certainly the longest of the passages. And we see kind of a number of the names by which Edom is known in the Bible. We see Teman, we see a reference to Esav, who is called Edom, and the history going all the way back to Esav is the history of this nation, Edom. We have we've seen a number of the prophecies also kind of begin with rhetorical questions, just like we saw this one. Has Israel no sons? Has he no heir? I think there was a rhetorical question, not right at the beginning of the Moab prophecy, but somewhere in there, there were rhetorical questions. We're seeing that technique recur here. And the rhetorical question to Edom is there no more wisdom in Teman? Has counsel vanished from the prudent? Has their wisdom gone stale? Right? They're making poor decisions. What happened to their seichel? Rabbi David Silber, in his podcast on this chapter, attempts to kind of build a relationship specifically. What's the notion of Edomite wisdom? And he tries to sort of develop that idea. We'll see a little reference to that just a bit later. And then we have, immediately God turns to start to talk about the destruction which is going to come upon Esav. We have a little bit of a reference again to grape harvests. If vintagers were to come upon you, would they leave no gleanings? But it is I who have bared Esav, chasafti et Esav, gileti et mistarav. I've exposed his place of concealment. V'nechba lo yuchal. He can't hide anymore. Again, hold that thought about Esav kind of being covered or uncovered, exposed or concealed. See a reference to that just a bit later in one of the central textual parallel in this chapter. And again, we have back to the kind of metaphor of drink, and usually it's the drink of wine. If they who rightly should not drink of the cup, this is presumably the cup of punishment, must drink it, should you go unpunished? God never makes it explicit, but my hunch here is that this is, again, a veiled reference to the Israelites. The Israelites have had to, drink from the cup of punishment so many times, and sometimes they were unjustly punished. So if the unjust get punished unjustly, how much the more so the just should be justly punished, and you, Edom, Esav, are going to be punished, as God swears by God's own name. Botzra, which is an Edomite city, will become a desolation and a mockery. And here we've seen this a number of times. Plays on the place names that are going to be destroyed. So Botzra is one of the names of the places that's going to be destroyed, but we also saw just a little bit above, Im Botzrim Ba'ulach, if vintagers were to come upon you. So there's a play here on Botzrim and the place name Botzra. Botzra is going to be a desolation. We even see that language of, a curse or a mockery that we dealt with and dwelt on last time about this sort of question of the shaming or laughing stock as adding insult to injury for the various nations that are going to be destroyed. Now, interesting, the turn, back into the Jeremiah's voice, which we haven't heard that much. Shmua shamati me'et Adonai. I have received tidings from the Lord. Very unusual way of delivering a prophecy, but it sounds like we're back in Jeremiah's voice for a moment. I've received tidings from the Lord, that a war is going to come. And now the I presumably shifts back to God. I have made you the least among nations, most despised among men. Now, we get back to the punishment. It's your arrogant heart which has seduced you. The fascinating description, Shochni bechagvei hasela, you who dwell in the clefts of the rock. This is actually used for the Israelites in the book of Song of Songs. Yonati bechagvei hasela, my dove in the cleft of the rock. So it's interesting to hear kind of a term which is used for Israel be almost identically used for Esav, maybe particularly because Esav was, is just adjacent to Israel. He's a twin brother of Jacob who becomes Israel. And so we recognize kind of almost they're twins, literally. So the idea of using parallel language to describe them is not surprising. But, whereas the dove in the cleft of the rock is, protected by God when it's Israel, here it's, doesn't matter where you hide or how high you nest, I will pull you down from there. So it's the parallel to highlight the difference. Each of us is a dove in the cleft of the rock, the Israelites and the Edomites, but the Israelites ostensibly are protected by a loving God, and the Edomites are punished. And Edom becomes a cause of appallment, and all who pass by will be appalled and hiss. So let me see if this is the spot where I wanted to show a quick parallel. Yeah. So we have very similar language here. Should you nest as high as the eagle, even from there I will pull you down. If thieves were to come to you, they would steal no more than they need. If vintagers came to you, they would leave gleanings. How thoroughly rifled is Esav, how ransacked his hordes. And we had the language also, I think around here, of making you like the smallest. Yep, and I will make you least among the nations. You will be most despised. So this is from Obadiah chapter 1. And now again, just to see again those same things. I will make you least amongst the nations, most despised. You dwell in the clefts of the rock. From there I will pull you down. And then the section just a little bit earlier, if vintagers come upon you, would they leave no gleanings, thieves in the night? So all these very, very same language, which we have in our chapter about Edom, we have in Obadiah. Obadiah is a one-chapter wonder. It's a one-chapter book, and it is about, in the beginning, you can't necessarily tell right away. Here, already in the end of the first verse. Thus said the Lord my God concerning Edom. Obadiah is a one-chapter prophecy. The book is one chapter long, and it's a prophecy about Edom and Esav. We see lots of the same language, and comes all the way down to the end with very famous language. The house of Jacob will be fire, and the house of Joseph flame, and the house of Esav will be straw. They will burn it and devour it, and no survivor will be left. And a line that we quote at the end of Az Yashir in our daily Shacharit Tefillah, Va'alu Moshim B'Har Tzion Lishpot et Har Esav, V'Hayta L'Adonai HaMelucha. Liberators will march up on Mount Zion to wreak judgment on Mount Esav, and dominion shall be the Lord. So we have lots and lots of language from Ovadia parallel here. Again, just indicating perhaps the fact that there was a limited pool of prophecies about the nations, and when a prophet sat down, they got whatever they got from God, and then they may have supplemented it with, the general prophetic material about that nation that was kind of floating around in the canon of Israelite prophecies. So perhaps Jeremiah, drew from some of this, and so we have that overlap. Okay, just a few more comments, and we'll pause again. We have a parallel, reference to Sodom and Amorah, and lots more destruction, and here imagery of kind of shepherds, and interestingly a reference to the Yam Suf. So again, these connections between the song at the sea. We just mentioned that the last line from Ovadia, redeemers will come up from Mount Zion to take control of the Mount of Esav, is said right after the song at the sea. And here too we have this association that the destruction of Esav will be heard at the Sea of Reeds. So this kind of connection between Esav and Yam Suf seems to pervade a few different places. And the heart of Edom's warriors on that day will be like the heart of a woman in travail. Again, another common metaphor of the pain of the childbearing woman. Okay, I think what we'll do is I'll just very briefly, so we can conclude the chapter, just note we have the Damascus one, and with very interesting language here. How has the glorious city not been deserted, the citadel of my joy? Is this referring to a place in Damascus, in Syria rather? If so, who's speaking here? Is this a lament of people? Seems like it, because otherwise the M in my joy would be capital. So it seems like people are, expressing their emotional feeling about their sacred city of Damascus, and yet, it's going to fall. Again, we have the language of the destruction of fire, and that's Damascus. We have Kedar and Chatzor, and again, those were much more grazing, nomadic tribes. So we have kind of that sense, the tents and the flocks carrying off the camels, the fact that they're going to wander even further. Nusu, Nudu, Me'od, right? They're probably already itinerant groups, but now you're going to have to wander even further because you're being attacked. This nation is going to be destroyed. Again, we have the reference to their camels and this interesting comment about their clipped hair, which we've seen elsewhere in Jeremiah, and sense of utter desolation with no one being able to live there. Then finally, we conclude with Elam, furthest east towards Mesopotamia. And here we actually have a timestamp. This was the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah concerning Elam at the beginning of the reign of King Tzidkiyahu. So this is somewhere around 597 or so. But again, when is that prophecy going to come true? Hard to know for sure what it's being, what period of time it's looking ahead to. But it's the destruction of Elam. Here we have interesting language. Arba kitzot hashamayim, the four corners of heaven. We're more familiar with Arba kanfot haaretz, the four corners of the earth. But apparently heaven also had its corners from which the four winds came, and we have a complete dispersal and scattering and destruction of Elam. And again, language we've also seen in some of the other prophecies, God's consuming sword, which is going to go after them. We have fire, we have wrath, we have sword. And then interesting, V'samti chis'i be'elam, I will set my throne in Elam, says God. And, in other words, in order to deal with the nations that God wants to destroy, God has to go there, so to speak. So God's sort of saying, like, I'm going to place down my throne so that I can operate out of Elam to destroy them from the inside. But
how is he going to do that?
Okay, good question. Hold on one moment. We're just concluding. But in the days to come, ba'acharit hayamim, I will restore the fortunes of Elam. Ashiv et shavut Elam, declares the Lord. So the first one, which was Ammon, and the last one, which is Elam, both have prophecies of restoration at the end. The middle ones, Edom, Chatzor, and Kedar, do not have any prophecies of restoration. So again, we just noticed that distinction. Estelle, you asked the question, how does God go to Elam?
I mean, really, if he's all inclusive, couldn't he just do it from where he is?
Right,
Why does he
operate
have
from
to
the
come
headquarters.
there?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating, just in terms of thinking about how God is presented as a character. God is presented as a character that moves from place to place. The temple is the seat, where God comes to meet us and visit with us, so to speak. It's very much not the Maimonidean, or the God of some of the prophecies who fills the whole earth. It's a sense of a concentrated presence of God, which actually goes to different places. So
They're
it's not
making him a human being.
Yeah, there is a lot of anthropomorphizing, no question. But that was the understanding of the people of the ancient world. And it's not, who knows? I mean, who knows? We say God is here, God is there, God is truly everywhere. That's only one view of, of theology. The biblical view much more had a God who, whether that God had a visible presence or not, certainly moved from place to place, certainly had some sense of coordinates, which is just different and fascinating. Lance, go ahead.
I have a central question for Estelle and Graham in particular, but for everybody. And the question comes from Moby Dick. Is it Ahab, God, or who that lifts this arm?
Ahab, God, or who? Are those
That lifts this arm.
Are those three options?
3 options.
Oh,
Good question.
Yes. The answer is yes.
man.
I didn't think of that answer.
Yeah, but that's the rugged individualist saying, I'm making fun of this question because obviously I am the one who raised this hand,
Mm.
Ahab, he's psychotic by that point, completely driven by revenge for this white whale that evidently took off his leg.
Right, but in Moby Dick, Graham,
Yeah.
the ship Rachel comes to the Pequod and asks Ahab for help to find some missing sailors or children. Ahab refuses to help the Rachel. At the end of Moby Dick, Ishmael, the only survivor of the Pequod, survives because he is saved by the Rachel, the boat that Ahab rejected, used to help. Now it seems to me that that's a message, but I don't know what it means.
In terms of this chapter, it's like God's kindness. God's kindness.
To Ishmael.
Yeah, through
But
Ishmael.
it's also kind of measure for measure, isn't it?
Mm.
Are we talking about measure for measure here?
Yeah, I got to reread.
Are we also talking about God scaring the daylights out of all of us?
They're all questions that none of us have answers to. I haven't.
Wow, Estelle, you stole my line. That's what I always say.
Oh, I'm sorry, but it's just the way I feel. I'm always asking.
Yeah.
It's
And
so interesting.
Rabbi Sachs has an article, drasha, whatever you want to call it, in which he says that the essence of Judaism is questioning.
The essence of Judaism is questionable?
That's what Rabbi Sachs says.
Questioning.
Questioning the essence of Judaism.
Is questioning. And that's basically all you can do. He implies that.
God, I've always questioned everything.
There you go, Estelle. You're a true Jew.
The only answer is a good question.
Yeah.
That's a
You
good
got
one,
it.
Graham. So are you a true Jew?
Oh, what?
I said you are also a true Jew. Let's
Oh.
face it,
Yes.
regardless of anything else.
I understand. Yeah.
All right, everyone. So we have chapters 50 and 51 will be the prophecies of Babylonia, and then we'll have the last few chapters again. Presume we're not meeting next Thursday, but the following. But we'll send an email just to remind. And great to see everybody. Love to mom and dad. And wonderful. Stay warm. Be careful, and see you soon.
Yeah. Don't slip. Don't slip.
Yeah. Great
Thank
to see
you.
everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It was very good. Thank you.